Hello and welcome to this week's final World Future Energy Summit Back to Business webinar. My name is Rob Jones, Content Director for the World Future Energy Summit, and I'll be your chair. Across the week, our Back to Business webinars have discussed low carbon business, the circular economy of waste, and the new energy economy. All can be watched on demand if you missed them. Today, we have a two-part webinar that focuses on Decarbonising GCC water networks. Shortly, we'll have a panel discussion looking at how to increase water efficiency, ideas for reuse, and ways to promote food security, all critical for the region. Joining me, we have Mohammed El Ramahi, Director of Asset Management and Technical Services at Masdar, Professor Peng Wang, Environmental Science and Engineering at KAUST in Saudi Arabia and Hong Kong Polytechnic University, Dr. Mohammed Dawood, Advisor for Water Resources and Environment Quality at Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, and Dr. Majid Al Qassimi, Advisor to the Minister at the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. Majid, now reducing end user consumption is going to be, that's going to be a significant benefit to decarbonising the water network. And again, I think there's a lot of focus really, not just in this country, but actually around the whole GCC, looking at how to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The focus here with the end user is really the onus of responsibility for what is a precious resource. The way we behave with water to begin with is something to address, where when in a country like the UAE or in the Middle East, where the natural resource has to come through, as was mentioned, desalination, when we can manage that, it's the demand side management that would help essentially what we're dealing with in terms of a required output. If we can shrink that and also encourage a behavior of efficiency and to curb any wastage from the end user, you really start to manage the problem in terms of how you deal with the demand side, and then the supply side question can be much more effectively tackled, if you will. Really, in terms of scale, whether it's at the household or at the commercial level, just having the understanding in the user of the responsibility to how water is used, and then what the ramifications are with the amount of water used to carbon demand and essentially all the energy used to generate your water, will help all the producers to vie, and as was said, even to put these requirements in tenders to say, okay, all this water has to come from renewable energy sources, has to be provided at a certain extent, but not in that it is wasted then or used irresponsibly, if you will, by the consumer side. And on top of that, a lot of the strategies that can be dealt with on the consumer side also have to dealing with things like stigma around where water comes from and how water is being reused or being supplied. And all the more awareness we can provide the end user really does provide opportunity for the supply side to match.
And is that happening? Are you seeing that end user awareness rising and therefore incrementally usage decreasing?
Yeah, absolutely. We have already a lot of local level municipalities and water providers, utility companies that are creating mechanisms where the consumers are aware of how much they're using, whether it's a sort of where you land in the sort of average of the consumption in your area. For that matter, tiered pricing systems always have a good sort of direct influence in how a consumer might behave. Education programs on what water is as a resource and how we can manage that better, and quite a wide outreach and awareness from the ministry itself on water as a resource and then its effect on things like the environment.
Is this something you've looked at as well, Majid?
Well, the importance of aquifer recharge really stems from the consumption from aquifers. What we have in the UAE is aquifer water being used for agriculture. And as such, how we manage that consumption of our aquifer water is critical. The recharge is something that is being done in a number of ways, from the damming of water in the mountainous areas in the Northern Emirates, and then direct pumping as part of work in Abu Dhabi. What we've tried to do is understand that we are trying to manage those aquifers more effectively and ensure that we're not overdrawing, where we have a critical, essentially, resource in water security there. And thanks to Her Excellency Fatma and the Ministry of Energy with the water team there, we're looking at ways in the water security strategy on how to better manage that consumption of the aquifer water, so that we're continuing to build out resilience in that case.
And then Majid, I think again you're focused on really looking at the agricultural side of water as well. Yeah. I think what's interesting is to what has to be considered when you're trying to balance food security, which is so important for this region, yeah, with reduced carbon footprint for water.
Well, the way we like to look at it is, if you're looking at the food, water, energy nexus, you really have three pressures here that are moving, in certain respects towards each other, and you will, depending on country, have a different essentially balance out between those three. Now, if you take essentially your carbon footprint of that, you're overlaying it on this nexus. And what happens is, in the countries like the UAE, that don't have the strongest natural resource availability for food production, a lot of the food side of the nexus is essentially filled out with trade. So one, from what you have in terms of local production, you may have certain carbon producing factors that you want to mitigate. So everything from your water production, desalination, or even on-farm practices. Now, in the UAE, we don't have a very large agricultural production system that sort of can be comparable to other agri-states, if you will. But date production is very large in the country, and is the majority of what we produce in terms of agricultural produce. But there, the water that's used, the efficiency of water use for those production systems. And there was a study done with the Environment Agency and ICBA, where, did we understand the water needs for that specific plant, and were we being efficient with that? That considered, our trade also can be managed in the sense where, if you are importing, food from the other side of the planet versus from your neighboring countries, you're also managing your carbon footprint in a certain way. Ultimately, where you can make the most impact is really in local production, and also where the ability to choose where something might come from for food, those choices will impact your carbon footprint. So in those choices, immediately you'll have a certain amount of carbon footprint you can address, but ultimately it's efficiencies in those systems that are going to give you the major returns. And then ultimately, in all of that food production, whether it be local or international trade, your waste stream has a lot to do to contribute to carbon, whether you're recapturing carbon or any food loss in the value production and the value chain, or post-consumption. So after people have consumed food and what's left goes to landfill, you can have other impacts of carbon in the environment, everything from what kind of nutrients are going either into landfill, what you're recapturing in terms of the ability to compost or reintroduce to the food production systems. So we're talking both on addressable avenues, and then really efficiencies, and even the circularity of carbon as you approach the smaller and smaller focus for food and energy.
Well, actually, and you've mentioned circular principles, or just started to touch on. I think that's a really interesting area, because again, it does lead to things like, how do you get water from other methods, atmospheric, etc. Yeah. How can the youth interested in agriculture get involved in this side of things?
Well, so there are a number of avenues the youth can be involved. One, reaching out directly to the agencies that are involved. I mean, Dr. Dawood even mentioned he has students that are engaged on this. And so the universities and the research centers that are doing this are always looking for, resources in terms of researchers and people that can help with this. I have to say our academia is very much integrated into government, and where universities can engage with government programs or even private sector programs to be able to solve for these problems. That's the first way. Second, definitely on the awareness and education. We need multipliers in our community that carry not only the message, but can take the time to educate the community on all the limitations that we or the challenges we face, and how we can essentially deal, and we mentioned this right early in the talk, around the stigma of consumption of these alternate or this new water, this water that we're bringing back in from possible processes. Ultimately, the youth are going to inherit this from us, and really, as much as we can engage with them and be able to communicate the challenges and really draw on their innovation and imagination for solutions, that will help us as well create more solutions that are long-term sustainable and really allow the region to continue to flourish.